here in the Leadership Lounge. I am your host, Dr. Shanisha Davis, and we have a very special guest today as we kick off a brand new series. We're going from control to connection. We're unpacking dominant culture norms and what does that look like in our leadership. Today, to open up episode number 1, Control of Image, I am so happy to introduce none other than Ron Brangman. Say hi to everybody, Ron.
Hello everyone. How you guys doing?
So let me tell you a little bit about Ron. He is the Organizational Development Director at Hillmann Consulting, LLC. But that's not it. He's also a pastor. He's also a life coach. Also a motivational speaker. And get this, he's also an author. His book is 7 Steps to Overcoming a Battle. 7 essential steps to navigate life's storms and emerge fortified. You gotta check out that book. And after this episode, I'm sure you'll understand why. Because listen, his work and his presence model what it means to be a leader, especially during this time. When we get to be authentic, shed all of the gunk off that no longer is useful to us so that we can emerge better, stronger, fortified. Right, Ron?
Yes, definitely.
So to get started with today's culture, we are going to be unpacking 3 dominant culture norms. We're going to be unpacking, that one that get me all the time at least, perfectionism.
Woo! Big one.
That's the big one. That's for me that I say there all the time. I have to keep unpacking that one.
It's a big one.
We're unpacking avoidance of vulnerability, and we're also unpacking right to comfort. Now, I want to give you a little context because this is our very first episode in the season. Each episode, we're going to be unpacking a cluster. And today, control of image, just addressing those 3. Perfectionism, right to comfort, and avoidance of vulnerability. But let's talk about a little bit about where these dominant culture norms stem from. Okun and Jones did seminal work on just white supremacist culture and what does that look like in the workforce in general. And they coined 13 of 14 terms, 3 of which we're addressing today. They had this really powerful statement. They said, the longer you swim in a culture, the more unseen it becomes. And that's what's happened, right? So it doesn't mean that if you exhibit any of these things, you're a racist, right? That's not what we're saying at all. What we're saying is that they were born in a time when control was the desired outcome. Obedience was the desired outcome. That's no longer where we live. However, we haven't shed some of the tactics. So we want to be in a space where we're connecting with folks, but sometimes we still utilize mechanisms of control with ourselves and with other people. But don't worry, we're going to unpack all of that today. We're going to put a spotlight on those 3, and then we're going to hold the mirror up to ourselves and say, where does this show up? Without further ado, Ron, can you tell us, how would you define perfectionism?
Well, first, I want to thank you for having me on. I'm going to refer to you as Doc. I really appreciate you having me on. Perfectionism, I think, starts out where people, especially in leadership, want to do everything right. They have unrealistic expectations, sometimes of themselves and sometimes of their team. Unrealistic expectations can lead to problems, even in a relationship. And a lot of people in positions of leadership have a false sense of value and straight up. But truth be told, the greatest leadership comes out of things not being perfect, things that need adjustment. Again, it is a big tactic that keeps a lot of people stuck, a lot of companies, a lot of organizations stuck trying to be perfect. We're going to touch a little bit about the difference between leadership and management, because there is a big difference in that too, so we're going to touch on that too. It is okay to make mistakes. Some of the greatest rewards, some of the greatest successes come after failure. And so if you don't allow yourself an opportunity to not be perfect, to not know it all, to have people around you where you can take some input, I think professionalism actually closes innovation, because innovation comes from struggle and conflict, and you need that. And perfectionism kind of avoids that kind of stuff.
I really appreciate you lifting that point about perfectionism leading and managing, right? That difference. Yeah. Mainly because a lot of what we're taught in institutions, schools, our leadership training, we're taught theory.
Yeah.
Typically, we're taught in ideal conditions, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we say, as you said, everything's not going to be perfect. And most of
No.
the learning comes out of those imperfections. However, when we're taught, right, how to implement a strategy or learn a specific skill, it's without the natural occurrences just of life that happen. So when that comes up, then we're stunned.
Yeah, we don't know how to handle it because many of us have been taught that conflict is bad. We actually focus on a training called conflict stimulation, where you want some conflict, you want some pushback. You don't want to have a team around you where everything you say as the leader is just accepted and gone with and run with, because sometimes some great ideas are behind conflict. And if you don't allow space for conflict, you actually shoot yourself in the foot. And as a leader, not a manager, as a leader, that should be what you're looking to bring forth in your team or the people that are around you.
And I'm going to ask next, where have you seen perfectionism in your own practice?
Oh, yeah.
And it impacted you and your team. But first, can you just give us an overview of the difference between leadership
Yeah.
and management?
Yeah, I see it all the time. Most companies put people in a position of quote unquote leadership because they were strong in one area. And not too many organizations do a great job of training people to be leaders. I don't think that you have to have a title to be a leader. I think that leaders are throughout organizations, throughout businesses, throughout churches, throughout anything. I've worked in for profit and non for profit. I've been a pastor in the church for 20 years. And some of the greatest leaders that I know did not have titles.
Mm.
If you're a leader, you know how to manage that which you've been given charge of, or you know how to manage people's emotions, you know how to manage a lot of stuff. And a lot of managers are not leaders. They're good at delegating and getting stuff done and systems and cycles and all that stuff done. But real leadership is people development, and it is really about positioning yourself in a place where you can bring the best out of other people. And not all managers know how to do that. You have to, all the things that we're going to talk about today, perfectionism, that has to die. Avoidance, that has to die. Get rid of a lot of that stuff, because as a leader, you are really given the gift of multiplying yourself, not duplicating.
I like that.
But multiplying. You don't create other leaders just like you. You just bring out the best in people and show them that they have the ability to lead. And in that, everything that you're leading grows.
And I couldn't agree more, because we were not designed to be solo.
Now,
We are designed for community, but so many
right.
of these dominant culture norms promote a more individualistic
Of course.
approach, right? So
Right.
it's difficult to find connection, right? If you're worried about how one is, how yourself is just feeling, or how yourself is
Right.
progressing. So really, in us finding connection, have to consider other people.
Right.
Um, and like you said, a lot of the learning comes from, hey, when my imperfections are on display, and both myself and my team can learn from them.
Right. Right. I was actually talking to one of my colleagues yesterday. We were talking about as we're developing for leadership. He just said yesterday, he said, what I've seen is I've seen more of my stuff, my own stuff that has to be worked on. And he said, yeah, kind of. I've seen some areas in myself that really need to be worked on. And we talked about triggers.
Mm-hmm.
And as a leader, you've got to know your triggers. You've got to know your shortcomings. As a leader that hires, you need to know your weaknesses so that you can hire strengths in other people. My team is not just all like Ron. Some of them are different, and I need them. And I think that leaders in organizations that thrive understand their weaknesses, and they are not afraid. They're not afraid for people to shine in areas where they may be weak. And I'm actually not even afraid for you to shine in areas that I may be strong in. Your shining doesn't diminish me. Now, as a manager, I might be threatened. As a leader, my job is to bring out the best in you. And so if you surpass me, I've done a great job leading.
Pat yourself on the back. Well done, right?
Well done. Well done.
So before we get into defining vulnerability, let's have you have a little vulnerable moment. And
Oh,
tell us where has perfectionism impacted your leadership?
well, I think being young in leadership, being young, being African American male, I thought that in the beginning of my leadership journey, there was only one of me in the company, and I was only in a supervisory role, and I felt like my leadership had to be flawless. I thought that I had to be perfect.
Mm.
It actually was that caused my demise because I did not want to admit my weakness and I didn't ask for help. Did a lot of what worked for others and it didn't necessarily work for me. And I operated in that for a minute. I'm sure we had some success, but I think that in the sense I burned out. I couldn't be vulnerable, couldn't ask for help, and then a male too. Males in leadership really struggle with the whole vulnerability thing. I didn't want to fail, could not fail. You get the pressure that you cannot fail. And I assumed that I was doing it right. And because I assumed I was doing it right, there was no room for pushback. There was no room for collaboration. There was really no room for it. It was kind of my way or the highway kind of thing. And as I look back now, I say, damn, I was a little,
Like,
I was a little much. But I learned from that, and it did cause a little burnout for me pretty early in my career too. Yeah.
yeah, I recently, when I did a development and I talked a little bit about burnout. And what I said about it was that, we have our truest, right, our inner identity, and then we have like our adaptive identity, right? The
Right.
person we feel like we need to be. And there's a sweet spot in the middle, right?
Right.
Where you're considering others, right? So you have your inner identity. When you are adapting too much,
Hmm.
that leads to burnout. So that those adaptive behaviors, and that's why it's so important for conversations like the one that we're having. That how do you be you? Have to be somebody else. You don't have to conform, right? You just have to work you really well. I mean, and sometimes we feel the pressures to uphold that facade.
Yes.
The more we do
Yes.
that, the less we lose connection, which is
Right.
the less opportunities we have to build
Right.
environment, trust, and safety, where that innovation, as you were speaking of,
Right.
really, really starts to breed. Now, how would you define, you did speak on it, but how
Mhm.
would you define avoidance of vulnerability?
Well, I think avoidance of vulnerability is just like you don't want to admit that you don't have the answers. Again, I think I can only speak from a male perspective. I know as a male, a lot of us we struggle with vulnerability because we've been fooled to believe that it's going to make us look weak if we admit that we don't have it all together or that we've got shortcomings. And so a lot of leaders, especially males, suffer in silence. They're not forthright about where they are and what their struggles are. So we avoid that. We avoid it. Actually deteriorates relationships too because I can't admit that I need help and I can't admit that I need help. And sometimes I won't admit that you are the help that I could use because that would mean that I don't have it all together or I can't figure it out. And it carried on into my personal life because I'm a firm believer in business and life integration. I don't think that there's this separation, this work-life balance. I don't actually believe that that's the thing. I believe that it's work-life integration. I believe the areas that you struggle in professionally, you probably struggle in those
And people don't
personally
even
too.
know it, but the people
And
around you
probably
do.
and so when I look back at even my wife would say certain things about, like it's okay to be, I'm like, nah, I don't want to follow with that. And I was carrying that into my leadership in the church, in business, in everything that I was doing, probably in my parenting and everything. So I think that a level of, for me, of getting to a place of humility, I had to get humbled. For me, I had to really do some inner searching. I just had to really have a come to Jesus moment with myself and see, like you're a little arrogant and you're wondering why you can't even bring the best out of people. Your team is not as strong as they could be because you think you got it all together. And it was really a self reflection. It's a buzzword now, but the first part of that is self awareness. You want to get to the other stuff without becoming self aware. And I just had to realize, you need to make some adjustments as a leader. If your real purpose is to encourage people to be their best selves, then you need to do some work on yourself. And you need to be the first example, the first fruit. You need to be the first one to exhibit this. And I was that.
Right.
And yeah. And it's funny, it's amazing because some of those people I supervised over 20 years ago are still close with me today. And I think that it was that shift that turned me from just being this leader that was really about the bottom line and success on the job. I had to keep my job. So when they said numbers had to be right, then I was pushing numbers. And when I realized when I shift that perspective, that we hit the numbers and people were happy
Right.
to work with me to hit the numbers.
People want
And
to do more when they feel
people
seen.
wanted to do more, yeah, because I became vulnerable and I began to share with my team like what I didn't know and what I couldn't do without them, how much I needed their support and their work and how much I cared about them. And we really built that team in a great way, and which led to my success and their success. And but I had to really be vulnerable. And I think that so many leaders are selling themselves short and selling their team short if they would just be vulnerable and just be real. And I think that that's really important for leaders. Vulnerability breeds relationship. And you cannot be a relational leader without a shred of vulnerability. You've got to be vulnerable. And it allows the people around you to be vulnerable.
Liberates them.
They're free, like you, me too.
Exactly. And that's where the
Yeah,
real magic starts to happen. And I love
yeah,
that you
yeah,
talked about, like, hey, sometimes you have to just, right, you had to sit with your feelings,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
And that's important because I talked before about a leader's unexamined emotions, they don't disappear. I say
no,
they leak, right?
yeah,
And they start
yes,
to leak into areas that
yes,
you really have
yes,
no idea. Your data won't necessarily show it, right? It'll be some indicators that something's wrong. But again, if you're pushing the numbers and not understanding the people that's behind the numbers,
right,
you're missing it. You're
right.
missing it and probably doing a lot more work than you have to do.
Well, again, because you get to this place where you don't trust anyone.
Yeah,
You
that's
don't trust, I tell people all the time, I work with managers and I tell managers if you can't delegate because you don't trust, then you got to look at yourself. Like if you can't give anybody anything that you do, then that's on you.
right.
Because there is something else you could probably be doing that's just as impactful, but you're spending time doing something you should be empowering other people to do.
I love that because
And
it takes time.
oh, it takes time. You've got to spend, yeah, you've got to spend time with people to get them to the place where you can pass off stuff. And when you do that, you get a couple things done. You empower them, you make them grow, you help them. Sometimes they grow to go,
Hmm.
because that's another thing as a leader. Sometimes you have to empower people to go. But you can't do any of that until you build relationship. I think that one of the key things, and I talk to a lot of leaders about this, I think one of the key things is you've got to be relational. I know managers that are hitting their numbers, but their teams are miserable.
Mm.
I know people who are doing every function that the job asks them to do, but their teams are happy when they're not present. That's an indication for me
And some
that
people are happy with
something's
that.
off. Yeah, and
Some
some
people
people
are
are
happy
okay
with
with that. Yes, yes.
that, right?
And some people are okay with that. I did it that way and I did it the other way. And I would tell you, you're missing out if you're just doing it that way. But when you have a team of people working with you that you're leading, I say it like this, it's simple. If nobody's following you, you're really not a leader.
Not a leader. Not a leader.
And so I think people think they're leaders, and you probably will have a lot of people that watch this podcast that are in positions of leadership, but not actually leaders.
Not actual
And I
leaders.
really want people to really do a real inventory of themselves and say, do people aspire to be like you, character-wise, everything else, to personality-wise? Do you have people's best interests at heart? And if you don't have those things, maybe you're not a leader. Every great leader that I know, every great leader that I've researched, had people that wanted to follow.
Because, like we said, some people are okay with that. The danger
Yeah.
in that, though, is even if you got those numbers right now or you got those results right now, probably won't be able to keep getting them because
No,
that institutional knowledge is going to leave when people realize that they can be valued somewhere
without a
else.
doubt. I just read this thing on LinkedIn the other day that said people don't leave jobs, they leave bad managers. They really do. And, I'm a firm believer that if you have a relationship with people, you desire um, their empowerment. You want it for them. I want you to be the best you. I want you to shine. I want you to believe that you can do anything. I want you to know that there's nothing stopping you. And when you get to the place where there's nowhere else for you to go, I'm okay with you going. I encourage people in my leadership time to not stay still. Like you've grown, like you like don't feel bad.
Yeah.
It's okay. And some of those people have opened doors for me that I never thought would be
See,
open.
that's what happens because
Yeah,
you said it. You said relational, right?
yeah,
And I think that some leaders, managers, right,
yeah.
may get
There
it
you go.
confused because you said, I want you to be your best self. I want you to
Right.
feel most empowered. But as you said, I even want you to go if that's your next step. But what you talked
Yeah.
about was it for them. It wasn't in self interest to
Right.
you. If I want you to
No.
be your best
No.
self for me, I want you to be empowered so you can hit
Right.
my metric. That's not relational. You may
No.
have
Not at all.
manipulated some ways to build relationship. However, that is not relational, which moves us into our
Right.
next point, this right to comfort. Go ahead and
Right.
define right to comfort for us.
Well, I think that this right to comfort is to think that everything's supposed to be okay all the time. All the
For
time,
who though?
everything's
For
okay,
who?
and that's for me.
Exactly.
It's got to be. It's going to be right, and that's again a part that stifles innovation.
Yeah.
We go back to innovation and creative ideas and new business ideas and new ways of doing things and new ways of thinking. I'm a firm believer in, I have a staff and I have some younger people that work for me. They think different than I do. And, they just, they look at something. One of them was talking to me today about something and I'm like, bruh, like, I don't even know what you're talking about. Like make it happen. Like, sounds good. I couldn't even tell you where to start with that because I didn't think of that. I'm not going to think of that. And so I think that's, but also you have to be able to have the tough talks with people.
Yeah.
I have to be able to say, well, this is not working.
Mm-hmm.
I think you need to do this. And this need for comfort makes you avoid the tough stuff, and,
Yes.
and as a leader, I'm a parent of four, I love my children. And, my children are great. But there are moments when I have to have the tough talks because I love them, because I want the best for them. Same in business as a leader. You have to address stuff. I say this thing like, you can be direct as a leader without having to be rude. And this desire for discomfort where you don't think you're going to have situations is unrealistic. And again, what'll happen is one employee disrupts the organization, and the leader, it doesn't want to correct stuff. And because they don't correct stuff, it actually becomes toxic. And now some of your best people are leaving because you wanted to remain in comfort and you don't want to have the big tough talk. And I'm a firm believer in this. Sometimes the tough talk brings out innovation. I'm an innovation person. I just believe that things come out of those places that if you avoid them, you miss it. It happens so often. I've seen it happen in church. I've seen it happen in business. I've seen it happen in sports.
That's it. That's what you've been
It's
saying.
relational.
That was that theme, right? This entire time. And that's
Yeah,
really
it's
why
relational.
these three fall under control of image. When you're trying to control your image, when your image is at the forefront of your brain and your decision making, you're
Right.
probably not building connection.
No, because the primary focus is me. Okay. Any leader whose primary focus is themselves is ineffective.
Said it, just make nice and clear.
It's just point blank. You cannot show me an effective leader that did not think of others.
Yeah,
It doesn't work.
which I appreciate. Um, you've naturally segued into our last segment, which is how do we make this practical? Sounds good. Okay. All right. You let me know. I got to work on this perfectionism
Yeah.
thing. I got to work on my vulnerability. And I
Yeah.
do not have a right to comfort. How
Yeah.
do I do that?
Realize that you're not perfect. Realize that you don't have it all. I don't care how much education, I don't care how long you've been doing something. We all have areas where we can be strengthened. I think that the real thing is just be real. Like, you're not perfect. You're not going to be perfect. It's not going to be perfect. Life is not perfect. That's why I wrote 7 Steps to Overcoming the Battle. You're going to go through stuff. Like, life is not perfect. So how can you be perfect? There is only one perfect.
I love that. Like, realize you're not perfect.
You're not.
Um, and you, right, you could literally just allow yourself, start small, because I often say, right, this thing is a journey. There's no
Yeah.
destination, and we're unlearning this. My post today was unlearning is not an event. Right.
Not a
Right, it's
lifetime
not
thing.
an event. It is
Yeah.
a practice. It is a
Yes.
lifestyle.
Yes.
So as
Yes.
you're saying, hey, you know what, I am not perfect, give yourself one imperfection to put on display.
So you got to give
Put it
yourself
out there.
grace. Yeah, you gotta give yourself grace. And I think for me, again, I'm a black male in my 50s. I grew up, in the 70s, and it was preached in my house. You've got to be better. You've got to be the best.
Oh
You've
yeah.
got to be. Oh
We
yeah.
had a
So,
mantra in my household.
oh my goodness. And so that's how I entered into the workforce. And then when I was, tagged for leadership, and that's the mindset that I had. You got to be perfect. I realized how imperfect
How
I was.
imperfect we are, right? We're not designed to know it all, right? We talked about that in the beginning. We are designed to
Yeah,
rely on one another. So as you're realizing you're
yeah,
not perfect, right? That was the first tip Ron gave.
yeah.
Just realize you're not perfect. As you're
Not perfect.
realizing you're not perfect, identify who. Identify a who you can lean on so
Yeah.
that you can lean into your imperfection and allow your team to support you. That's where that real connection gets built.
That's it.
How about
That's it.
avoiding vulnerability?
Yeah. Uh, I don't want to say that I avoided vulnerability, but I had fake vulnerability.
That's good.
I think I think that many of us have fake vulnerability. I've seen this in coaching people and in leadership development. So, I won't give you too much because if I give you too much, you're gonna think that, you know. And so I've seen that, and I did that, and sometimes some areas I'm still working on that.
Yeah, it's a journey.
It's a journey, and I had to unlearn that. I learned
Hmm.
that as a leader, you never let them see you sweat. We
Yeah,
heard that.
it's a phrase.
Yeah, yeah, that was a phrase. That was a catchphrase. You
Hmm.
never let them see you sweat. Doesn't mean you're not sweating.
Right.
You just don't let them see you sweat. And so you hid it. It was fake. And so, I would let you see me, sweat a little bit, but really I was pouring sweat. Um, I think when you can be vulnerable with other people, it creates empathy.
Mm. Mm.
Empathy, I tell all our leaders, as I'm doing trainings, I tell them empathy is not sympathy. Like, I
Love
still expect you to get it done, but I understand where you are because I too have stuff. I'll pray, meditate, go to therapy, find a friend, find a religious leader, pastor. Like, there are ways for everybody. It's different. Some people it's journaling. I encourage all of it. I encourage what worked for me may not work for somebody else. It could be a spouse, it could be a friend, it could be a dog. And when you find
that. I
yourself a
love
safe
that.
space, you need to be vulnerable. You need to let your hair down. The world has just taught us to keep walking. And again, when we're talking about leadership, most people can see your struggles any. And a lot of times we think that we're fooling people,
Hmm.
but they can see it anyway.
Yeah, and that's so important that you named that because you're saying that's something that you have to start with you.
It's
Now,
you.
as a leader, I can try to create conditions where people feel comfortable being
Right,
vulnerable.
right.
However, that starts within the individual. You, especially if you're a leader of many leaders, it is up
Come
to
on.
you to find out how do you work on being vulnerable. And Ron listed many different mechanisms to do
Yeah.
so. Lastly, right to comfort.
Now, The one thing that I say is that when there's more discomfort than comfort, then there's really disorder.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's
If
good.
But I'm aware that the discomfort doesn't negate stuff. And I think that when you have this desire to always be in that space of comfort, you really don't challenge. Like you don't push back. You don't allow room for
You don't
pushback.
grow.
And I think that when you operate in that place, you don't give people opportunity to push back. And I think
Yep.
pushback is good. I say to my staff all the time, my team, like if I don't really mind you coming to me with a problem, but I like you to come to me with a problem and a possible solution. So I think that again, I believe, and if we go back to innovation, ideas, diversity of thought, leaders encourage all of that. And sometimes that is uncomfortable.
Very.
And real leaders encourage that. I want you to think different. That's why you're on the team. I had a colleague, and he would always say, we want to get the highest and the best use out of people. And like something went off for me, and I realized like that's the kind of leader I want to be. I want the highest and the best use out of people, and I want to inspire them, empower them to be greater. And that's the kind of leader that I strive to be. And again, just has to always be relational.
If that's what your eye is set on, right? That's what you're
Yeah.
going to do. It's like we say here on the show, leadership is not a destination. There is no arrival. It is
No.
only a journey. So we have to
Journey.
embrace that journey. So
Yes.
before we get out of here, I want to make sure anybody who needs to find you knows how to do so. Can you please share with us how to find you, how to get your book?
Yeah, well, they can find me on my website is brangmancoaching.com, and that's BRANGMAN coaching.com, and we are always accepting clients. And then I am on Instagram. I make everything really simple. It's R Brangman. On Facebook, it's Ron Brangman. And my book, which hit Amazon last year in April, it took me about 18 years to write it. Um, because I believed I was a speaker, not a writer. And then I was actually coaching a client to write his fourth book. And he said, "So where is yours?" And I said, "Oh, okay." My vulnerability. I said, "I'm not really a writer." And he said, "Well, then, talk your book, get it done." And so we set out to get this done. So this is on Amazon, 7 Steps to Overcoming a Battle. It took me time to write it, but I did it, y'all. And so if you'd like to support, go on Amazon and pick up a copy. Give me an honest review.
You got any final thoughts for us as we close out?
Listen, I'm a person of faith. I believe that the greatest leader that ever walked the earth was Jesus. He took 12 and turned the world upside down. I believe that if we want to be great leaders, we need to take what we have and do what we need to do and turn our organizations, our companies, and this world upside down. But in order to do that, he had to empower people. And so I encourage leaders to be vulnerable, be honest with yourself, do the work. Development never stops. I think that, you got to read, you got to watch podcasts like this, you got to watch people, you got to model yourself after people. Everything's not for you. So I say all the time, eat the meat and spit out the bones. But the greatest leaders study leaders. And if you find effective leaders, some coaching, get a mentor and learn how to lead. Even if you're in leadership for a minute, things are changing. Another thing is, as a leader, you must constantly fill your cup. You must constantly fill your cup. Many leaders are trying to lead, pouring out of empty cups. Many people think that they're hiding it, and they're not. They're burnt out and they're miserable, and they're trying to lead teams, but they can tell you're burnt out and miserable. So fill your cup. And so in order to empower people, you must be empowered yourself. Another thing is leaders lead by character and integrity. It's not like, when we were growing up, my mother would say, "You do as I say, not as I do." The truth be told, people will do what you do and not care too much about what you say. So model yourself as a leader, and you will empower leaders. And I think that's about it for me.
Thank you so much for joining us in the Leadership Lounge today.
Yes.
Thank you for all of the gems that you have dropped.
Yes.
Go
Thank you.
find him, y'all. Go read the book. And
Yes.
just continue to unlearn the things that no longer serve you.
Yes.
Again, it's not an event, it's a practice. So give yourself some grace, as Ron
Yes.
said earlier, because we're not going to always get it right, because there is no right to be had. We are all in pursuit of just better leadership together. If this resonated with you, please save it, share it, like it, so that it can get to somebody else who might benefit from it. Until next time, in the Leadership Lounge, we'll see you later. Bye.
Bye bye.
Yeah.